Bill was an airman first class when he was shot down and captured in North Vietnam on September 20th, 1965. He was held until 1973 in many brutal Vietnamese POW camps. He is the longest held enlisted POW in American military history. And the officers in the Hanoi Hilton decided to make him an officer, right? That was fun. The Air Force didn't agree with it, and he'll tell you the story. I'll let Bill tell you the story because it's much more fun when he tells it. But it really is my distinct pleasure to honor our keynote speaker here and bring him up, please. William Bill Robinson, a serious individual.
Thank you. Thank you. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here. However, it didn't start off that well this morning. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, this group of gentlemen over here looked at me and told me I was out of uniform. So I would like for them to stand up so that everyone knows what the uniform of the day is. Tennessee, Big Orange. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few minutes with you. You know, I've been sitting around for over 40 years waiting for an apology from Jane Fonda. And now I've got to wait another 40 years for an apology from her twin brother, Donald Trump. He said he likes you, but he didn't like me. Well, I'd like to inform him that I love you. Because when our nation called, you answered, and you said, take me. You spilt your blood in Vietnam while he was sitting on 5 deferments. It's not much we can say other than tell Donald Trump to get a life. You know, many of us, our story didn't start in Vietnam. It started in our hometowns. I grew up in a little cotton mill town in eastern North Carolina. When I became of age, you might say that I could understand, my grandfather took me down to the cotton mill where he worked. And over in one corner was a wall. And as I looked at the wall, it was just name after name after name. Finally, my grandfather broke the silence and told me about this wall. It contained the names of people in our community. When America came a-calling, they answered the call would take me. You know, and I looked at some of the names, and my grandfather pointed it out to me, and I realized in that little village that I lived in, there were a number of heroes that I had brushed shoulders with, shook hands with, spoken to. I never knew that they went out and served their country. And they too, like many of you, were suffering from wounds of war. But they were proud Americans. As we discussed a few, and then in the process, I noticed that some of the names had stars beside them. I asked my grandfather, I said, what does that star stand for? And kind of with a lump in his throat and a tear in his eyes, he said, they're the ones that made the ultimate sacrifice for everything that we enjoy today. And we fast forward to our generation. We have a wall with over 58,000 stars of our brothers and sisters who made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we enjoy today. Over 1,500 of them joined the over 83,000 Americans still unaccounted for from war, the ones we refer to as POWs and missing in action. So we must always remember the sacrifices that others made as we were able to simply come home. You know, there's still over 7 million stories of Vietnam. What I find interesting today, that number of 7 million now has grown to 12 million. As the cowards, you might say, came home. It's sad when the Vietnam era was, with official count, is 488 prisoners of war still surviving. Our own VA is treating over 900 Vietnam-era prisoners of war. We have a POW network that's tracking 3,400 wannabes as far as prisoners of war. So we have a lot of false identity, and I appreciate that the VVA requires a DD Form 214 in order to be accounted among this great group of men and women. I left my home, joined the Air Force. I had an adventure in southwest Oklahoma, went to Korea, back to North Dakota, and finally, this thing called Vietnam started appearing on the radar. I wondered, was I prepared? And then I realized how fortunate I was, because I came in 61 when the World War II and the Korean War veterans were nearing the end of their military career. And they laid down examples, and they put forth the leadership and showed the strength to the new recruits, you might say, as we move forward. In fact, many of those joined us in Vietnam, and they were our leaders at particular times as we came up to steam. When I did get my call, you know, I said, Vietnam, where is this place? You know, and you go look on a map, and you couldn't hardly find it because it had been redesignated as Southeast Asia. So people said, well, you go find Thailand and look to the east, and that's Vietnam. And so when I went over, I ended up actually in Thailand. I'm still working on a trip to South Vietnam, but I haven't made it there yet. But I did get plenty of North Vietnam, so that's not on my bucket list anymore. When I joined my organization, I fondly say, you know, everything has turned green over my lifetime, and I keep telling people, they mention Jolly Green, I said, no, we were pre-green. We were noted as the low and slow guys. You know, our top speed was 60 miles an hour. You know, and the airplanes that escorted us only had to fly circles around us about 10 miles around, you know, so they could just kind of eye us over in the corner. But we were called upon to do a job. And like you, we did it to the best of our ability. They gave us an old airplane. It was non-combat capable. It was finally referred to as an LBR airplane, local base rescue. First thing we had to do was make it into a combat airplane, and we did that with a simple piece of quarter-inch steel on the pilot and the co-pilot seat. And we sat on our World War II flak vest in the back, and we were ready for war. We realized that we didn't have the range that we needed. So we go to a group of NCOs, put their head together, and said, we got to come up with some sort of in-flight refueling. So we introduced a 55-gallon barrel, 2 quick disconnects, and a garden hose. And it worked. And as a crew chief, one of my responsibilities was, once we'd burn off enough fuel, is to flip that barrel over, hook up the quick disconnects in the garden hose, drain it into the proper fuel tank, retrieve the quick disconnects in the garden hose, and get rid of the 55-gallon barrel. So I get credit for a couple of bombing runs over North Vietnam with a 55-gallon barrel. We did what we had to do, just like you, whether it was on the ground or in the air. We took what we had and we made it work. You know, and we were excited as our tour was coming near an end. They brought in the new airplanes, and we were excited as we put them together and got them in the air. And we said, well, now we can go pack our stuff and go home. And on their first flight out, they had problems. The Air Force had thought they had bought the perfect airplane, so therefore they had not made any arrangements for our replacements, and this was it. And so they extended us for the duration until they can iron out the problems that existed in the new airplane. And during that time, I started my 3-month TDY on a rescue mission over North Vietnam on the 20th of September 1965. You might say that we were partially successful. We located the pilot. I had extended the hoist down from the airplane, and he was getting in it when we came under fire. And you might say from that point on, it was one miracle after another. How we all survived that airplane with not a single scratch as far as enemy fire, which destroyed the airplane. We fell approximately 90 feet. As we hit the ground, the airplane landed in an upright position, and we all survived. We were able to extract ourselves from a broken airplane. I remember the words of the pilot we were trying to rescue as we landed nearly on top of him. He says, "This place is infested. We need to get out of here." Well, it sounded like a very good idea to me at that point. And so we tried to evade. We got far enough away from the airplane because we knew they were going to come in and blow it up, and that we needed to be in a safe area because even though it was an old airplane, it still contains things that would not sit good in enemy hands, and necessary action had to be taken. So we got about a half a mile away, and we found what we thought was a cave nestled back in the jungle foliage there, and we were sitting there waiting for darkness. As time went on, we could see the group of Vietnamese seeming to grow in number as they passed in front of us. Finally, after about a half an hour of this, they stopped all at once in front of us. And we were probably looking at anything from 100 to 150 people with machine guns to machetes. As they identified, they knew where we were. And I'll always remember the words of my pilot: live to fight another day, because we were clearly outnumbered at this point. We were taken into captivity at that point, and we were moved out of the area. And at first we went to the local village, and we were put on public display like a prize trophy. And we were, you might say, paraded through the streets. Next thing you know, someone with a blowhorn showed up, and we were getting the hell beat out of us. And they had to extract us from that and took us to another village. Again, curiosity seekers. The next thing you know, the blowhorn shows up, and all hell breaks loose. And this repeated itself time and time. At one point, they got a little bit more sophisticated, and I'll never know to my dying day whether this is real or fictional. But to me at that moment, it was very real when they took me out and they kneeled me down in front of a freshly dug grave. I could see in the shadows behind me someone standing there with a weapon at the back of my head. And I could listen to someone reading out a proclamation. I'm thinking to myself, this is my trial, my conviction, and possibly my execution. You might say I was sitting there counting my breaths, waiting to ascend into heaven, you might say. And I waited. And finally, a voice in the distance broke the silence as though to say that they had changed their mind. And the guards came and picked me up. And from that point on, I had a reassurance that death was not in my future, that I was going to live. I didn't understand the circumstances in which I was going to live under, but I knew that I was going to live. That continued. We moved, and eventually we were turned over to the regular military, and then we trudged north, and finally arriving in Hanoi, the capital city of North Vietnam. And when we got about a block from the Hanoi Hilton, the prison we had named, they pulled off the blindfold so we could see those 25-foot high walls with the concertina wire and the broken glass. And I can remember one of the guards saying, "Home." And I'm thinking somewhere east of San Francisco, and he's thinking this hellhole. And so, I just had a moment of flashback, and I dreamed that, that everything was going well in the South, because we were all convinced this was going to be a short war. We want to get in there and get it over with, kick a little butt, go home and stand there with the trophy, And so we were excited, thinking, well, we'll just be here for a few days. And many of us adopted our lifestyle. I chose a 3-day stay in North Vietnam. Yesterday I was shot down, today's today, and tomorrow I'm going home. And that one day I spent trying to maintain my mental and physical strength so that I could someday walk the streets of America again. I remember a lady walked up to me one time, and when I had finished speaking, and she said, "Well, you don't look like you were a prisoner of war." I said, "Well, then I did a damn good job, didn't I?" Once I went inside that wall, those big doors, and when they shut behind me, I had no clue what would be next. I was ushered back through a series of gates, and I finally ended up in what I learned later had been named New Guy Village. It was a cell about 3 feet wide, about 6 feet long. Inside of it was a bed that was about 18 inches wide and about 5 feet long with a little bucket at the end of it. You see, this bed was made for not Vietnamese, not big fat Americans like me. As I stood there, a voice rang out, identifying himself as Colonel Robinson Reisner. After basically 10 days on the road, I was looking for some encouraging words. And as his voice spoke up in English, he identified himself and said, "Be prepared to die for your country." I was just 1 month past my 22nd birthday, and I was thinking of all other things I'd rather be doing at this point. But I understood what he said. And he followed up with a simple program. He says, if we survive, we must return with honor. And so you might say the groundwork was laid right in the beginning, what was expected of us. We were very fortunate in the sense that we could look at past wars. We can remember scenes of the World War II POWs and the Korean War POWs coming home, and we could simply say, they did it, and we can too. And so you might say they laid the groundwork for the road to freedom. that we were getting ready to go down. As I stood there, they opened a little peephole in the door, and they served then a short shirt, a long shirt, a short pair of pants, a long pair of pants, much like pajamas with a drawstring, a bar of soap, a tube of toothpaste, a toothbrush, a hand towel, a mosquito net, and a blanket. And as I laid those out on my bunk there, little did I know they would be my worldly possessions for the next 8 Thanksgivings, 8 Christmases, and 8 New Years that I would ring in captivity. Our rations were meager. We ate all flavors of greens. When I say greens, I'm talking about grass. I'm here to report that grass does grow year-round in Vietnam, and it's served very carefully, simply boiled in water. Meat was next to non-existent, and we were given occasional piece of bread, and our mainstay was rice. So many people ask me today, do you still eat rice? I said, I still eat good rice. One other thing that Colonel Reisner had said was learn the tap code. And that tap code was basically, it was introduced by a friend that we were talking to. I referred to him as the other famous guy from Tupelo, Mississippi, Smitty Harris. Smitty Harris said he picked it up out of a book somewhere, he doesn't remember. But basically all it is you take the alphabet, you drop the K out of it and put it in a square of 25. And in a tapping process, you identify the row and then the letter. For instance, if you want to send a C, you would go first row, third letter. An R essentially would be fourth row, second letter. A Z would be 5 and 5. And this worked quite well once you understood it. And some guys got as good as 25 or 30 words a minute simply because we didn't have a teacher there to count off for spelling. But the other form was an A was 1 and a Z was 26. So you can see how easy that would be easy to adopt. Yes, most aircrew members knew Morse code, but trying to tap Morse code through an 18-inch wall did not work too well. I think, as I mentioned before, I was there a 3-day stay, but each shoot down had a new message for us when he came, and we'd do our best to contact him and ask him how the war was going, and their response would be, it can't last 3 more months. We'll be out of here before Christmas. And you might say that was just a little bit of energy we needed every time, is that we were convinced that the war was nearing the end, that you guys were going to allow to win this thing in the South, and we were going to all go home and have our parade down New York City. But the politicians would not allow that to happen. At first, the Vietnamese were pleasant towards us. They tried to impress upon us how smart it was to work hard and give it to somebody else. And of course, we were of capitalist mind. We didn't mind helping anybody, but we didn't want to create a way of life for them. We were trying to create on our own way of life. But they felt it was good to throw it in the pile, everybody takes what they want. And as we started going from solitary, I had spent about 6 months in solitary, and we started moving into rooms, and at one point we moved into a room with 8 guys. And we decided we were going to try some of this communism stuff. We took that tube of toothpaste we had, and that bar of soap we had, and we put it over in a corner. everyone to share. Within a week, we were out of toothpaste. In another week, even though we were only getting a bath, once or twice a week, we were out of soap. And we all gathered one day, and the senior ranking officer said, "What's the problem?" He said, "We need to have a room discussion." I said, "What are we going to discuss?" He said, "We're going to discuss communism." I said, "What do you mean?" "It ain't working." "What do you mean it's not working?" "Well, where's the soap?" "We're out." "Where's the toothpaste?" "We're out." And it's not scheduled to get any more for about 2 or 3 more weeks. And we want to make it clear, when that bar of soap comes through that window, it's mine. You control your own soap. When that tube of toothpaste comes through the wall, it's yours and it's mine. And I'll control my toothpaste from now on. Because, when nobody was held accountable, you see some guy sitting there brushing his teeth and he's foaming at the mouth and it's dripping all over him, And then you see another guy that it looks like he's trying to be a Barbie doll, using up all the soap. Because there was no one to manage the few little things we had. So we honestly gave communism a try for about one bar of soap and 1 tube of toothpaste. And we figured out real quick, somebody's got to be responsible. One of the things as we moved into POW life, as the numbers started to grow, we started to getting a little publicity back home. But Robert McNamara took to the airways and explained to the world the prisoners were expendable. Because the rumors had it we were being tortured, and in reality was their thought process is, if we made them of non-value, then they would leave them alone, move them into prison camps, and everything would be wonderful. The truth was that wasn't their intent at all. They were trying to get us off the front pages of the newspaper. And I might add, for a number of years, they were very successful at that. Shortly after that, I moved into a prison camp. Yet there's probably the most horrifying in existence. I moved into a 5-by-8 cell, 40 miles out in the country with no running water, no electricity. We were fed early in the mornings, we were hog-tied the rest of the day, and we were untied at night. And we lived like this way for over a year, until finally our health started to fail and they moved us back to civilization. And I said, just to think that water and electricity defined civilization was simple in itself, for it did make our life improve. Mainly because when they moved us back, they had to increase the numbers in order to accommodate it. Because they, like us, had believed it was going to be a short war, and so they had not made any preparations. One of the difficulties was that we were never considered prisoners of war. We were considered criminals, and therefore we would not only be treated as criminals, but we would eventually be tried as criminals, and we were assured that possibly some of us would never be allowed to come home as a result of our criminal activity. We lived under simple philosophies, just like many of us do each day. We never gave up. We never gave in. We rolled with the punches. We bounced back, and we were ready for the next round. Our leaders understood the problems we had, and they had one key that we added to the code of conduct: not to sustain permanent injury. Always have an exit strategy. And each of us developed our own exit strategy. It's amazing when we were finally forced into writing something that, was of no value to anyone. It's amazing how many people flew with Clark Kent Ben Casey, and Red Button, John Wayne, Rock Hudson, just anybody. And one name kept appearing in just about everyone's writings, and that was a fellow called Clark Kent. So I got called in one day, and they want to know what I knew about Clark Kent. I said, well, he's a pretty nice fellow. She said, well, what branch of service is he in? I said, well, last I heard, he was in the Air Force. But he said, well, somebody just told us he was in the Marine Corps. And somebody else told us he's in the Navy. I said, well, that's what those kind of guys do. They're our morale factor. And so they go and fly into different branches of service to make sure that everybody's okay and we're all on the same page. And so, oh, okay. We have some guys like that. I said, okay. People says, what's in your survival kit that will help you to endure things like that? I said, my upbringing. I said I was brought up in a family of faith. And, I said I can remember my mother many times over looking me square in the eye and said, Billy, you'll never be burdened more than you can stand. And those words kept me strong. Those words I repeated time and time again when the things were going rough. And, they were a real comfort to me as I think about the difficulties we experienced. After we came back to the Briar Patch, again, the numbers started to grow. They had to put us together. And we were looking for different things. And you see, we never received an international package from the International Red Cross, because they were not allowed to inspect the prison camps. The American Red Cross did make an effort and send packages to us in North Vietnam. Unfortunately, when they were intercepted on dead North Vietnamese soldiers in South Vietnam, they ceased sending packages. Communications with our homes were limited and sometimes far between. It's when people ask me, do you harbor a lot of hatred for the Vietnamese? I said, no. I said, only hatred I harbor for them and the lack of forgiveness is the way they treated my family. Because I was listed as missing in action for 3.5 years when I was being held a prisoner of war. Because I cannot tell you the untold pain that caused my family and other families who endured while their loved ones were being held in North Vietnam. Yes, there were some rumors that he was there, or he was there, or he was there, but there was no official communication from the Vietnamese as far as our status of well-being. Then came the stopping of the bombing in 1968. Many of you were in South Vietnam, and I'm sure you were excited as we were, because we were almost convinced an end to the war was very near. Another propaganda move to mislead the Americans. And when we got word of it, we were as excited as many as you were. Each time that door cracked, we were standing there with everything we owned wrapped up in a blanket, ready to go home. Only to learn later, but we were not even part of the negotiations. Kind of like what we experienced a couple of weeks ago, as our brothers are still being held in Iran. Wasn't even part of the conference. Those words, expendable, were like neon lights in our room as we made it through that difficult time. But because of the International Red Cross and the Red Cross not getting involved, you might say, the Vietnamese took another step and they allowed our families to send us our care package. Those packages started out in America at around 6 pounds, and by the time we got them, were a pound. Those things included were coffee, tea, bouillon cube, bacon bits, a T-shirt, or a handkerchief of that nature. I can remember when the first package showed up, one of my friends was sitting there on the steps, cuddling a pack of Kool-Aid. And you know, the first thought, well, damn, that's just a pack of Kool-Aid. No, that was the first contact he had had with his family in nearly 5 years. That there was a family out there waiting for him. When I look, I think the real heroes of the Vietnam War were those who waited and waited and waited for good words, for any kind of words. You know, and I think about the wives, the moms. Could you imagine a mom getting up in the morning? She's got to put her smiley face on and look at her children and say, everything is okay. Daddy will be home soon. Then she goes, and after she gets them off to school, and she cradles her head in our arms and said, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, how can I prepare my children for what possibly could happen? And then one day, your child comes home, and he looks you in the eye and he says, Mom, is my daddy a bad man? And she immediately said no. And then she inquired why a young boy would ask such a question. He said, well, my teacher in class today brought up the fact that my daddy was a prisoner of war, that he committed crimes against the Vietnamese people, that he had to be punished, and he would possibly never come home. Mom, is my dad a bad man? You know, after the bombing ceased, we did see an improvement in our living conditions. A little bit better food, a little bit larger groups. But up to that point and continue, I'd say we lived under what I refer to as the four faiths. Faith in ourselves, we had what it took to get the job done. Faith in each other, that we would support each other in every way, and that we would someday come home together. Faith in our country, that it would not abandon us, but most of all, faith in our God, that he would see us through. We woke up one night by the Vietnamese, and all of a sudden, in a dead sleep, they came in a panic, and they made us roll up our bedrolls, and next thing you know, we were out the door. In transportation buses, and we ended up in the Hanoi Hilton. We had no clue what was going on, but we slowly put it together as we moved into the room. Could you imagine a guy that had been in solitary confinement for 4 years, all of a sudden he walks in and he has 40 other roommates. We're looking at each other like, what in the hell is going on? And finally, we put it all together. And shortly after the raid in Sante on the 20th of November 1970, after a group of military from all branches doing his or her part to ensure, they had raided a prison camp that was about 40 miles outside of Hanoi called Sante, trying to extract some American prisoners out of the prison camps. At that point, you know, you might say that that expendable label was thrown to the wayside, and we were labeled as high value. For once that happened, we were moved into the Hilton. We took over the Hilton completely. Up to that point, we had only used a quarter of the Hilton for POWs, and the rest of it was being used for political prisoners. And now we were in a compound, 40 and 50 men to a group. We felt like King Kong, and we were in many ways. When the Vietnamese tried to challenge us by identifying who they wanted to lead which room, I saw America's finest as each one of the senior officers stood up and said, "I'm in charge." When they drug him out, the next one stood up. And after much effort, the Vietnamese conceded, and this was our first major victory in dealing with the Vietnamese. It was kind of like an administration change had made all the difference in the world. You might say, as a result of just a few, our life changed from hell to a livable hell. Those dreams of someday coming home were now starting to take root. Someone asked me one time, said, could you identify POW life in a shorter version? I said, yes, it can simply be described as hours, days, weeks, months, and yes, in many cases, years of boredom, punctuated by terror. You say, what governs what you do under certain circumstances when you're in solitary, when you're being tortured? I said, it's one simple thing. You knew the rules, but most of all, you knew what you could live with the rest of your life, because that was the faith that was handed to you. So that governed every response that you did under every circumstances. Can I live with this the rest of my life? You know, we got up in the mornings, and many of us would face the east, which we thought was the closest way to the USA. And we'd, you might say, turn to what we referred to as an imaginary flag and recited the Pledge of Allegiance. I have a friend of the VVA member, and he assured me that he ever heard me speak anywhere without telling the story about Mike Christensen, that he would haunt me the rest of his life. So he's always encouraged me to tell the story of Mike and his flag. Mike Christensen, just a young kid growing up outside of Selma, Alabama, talks about getting his first new pair of shoes when he turned 13 years old. Talked about convincing his mom to sign for him to join the Navy when he turned 17. Went on to be a naval officer and was shot down and captured in North Vietnam. But one of the things that Mike missed most was Old Glory. And so Mike came up with the idea, and he took his long sleeve shirt and he gathered material, a makeshift of anything, buttons, whatever he could find and collect. And one day he took string from his blanket, and with a bamboo needle, he donned an American flag in the back of his long sleeve shirt. And at one point, he proudly stood up in front of his roommates, which were some 40 strong, and as McCain described it, as he unfurled that American flag, as they stopped, came to attention, and recited the Pledge of Allegiance, looking at a makeshift flag. Mike secured that flag during the day and only unfurled it at night and put it in a corner of the room where no one else could see it except his roommates. But unbeknownst to him, we had a nighttime inspection by the Vietnamese, and he did not have time to secure the flag, and they came in and they saw that flag and they went absolutely ballistic. Mike, being the type of person he was, identified himself as the maker of the flag. No more had he got the words out. According to McCain, he caught a rifle butt across the back of the head, and down he went, in semi-unconscious. The Vietnamese grabbed him by his legs and drug him out of the room feet first. And you could hear the pain of Mike as he went through torture. He was basically the last man tortured in Vietnam, and all he wanted was an American flag. Finally, after a few days, they drugged Mike back into the room, feet first, just like he had left, semi-unconscious, and dropped him in front of his roommates as a sign of what not to do. His roommates picked Mike up, according to McCain, with nothing but prayer and a washcloth and cold water. They nursed Mike back to health. Finally, one day, Mike sat up in the middle of his bed with a grin from ear to ear and announced it was time for flag number 2. Never give in, never give up, roll with the punches, and be prepared for the next round. I give it credit to the Navy. We have a few trinkets here and there throughout the Air Force named after POW heroes. But the Navy went further than that. They have the USS Stockdale, who was a ranking prisoner of war in North Vietnam, that sails the seas under the banner, "Return with honor." And we also have the USS Billy Lawrence, a proud Tennessean that sails Navy's flag under the banner, "Never give up." You might say that the last couple of years up there, we were just waiting for you guys to get it done in the South. You see, when I was shot down, there was less than 20,000 troops in Southeast Asia, and it grew up to over 600,000. And by the end of '72, we were down to 20,000. President Nixon had done what President Johnson said he was going to do. President Johnson said in 1964, "I'm not going to send American boys to do what Asian boys do for themselves." And I can remember sitting in the prison camp, said, "What the hell did he say?" But as President Nixon took over, Vietnamized the war and allowed them to control their own destiny. And at one point, everything had been served. He was being pressured by you in the South to go north to bring us home. President Nixon was debating those circumstances. But when they got up and walked away from the table over the POW issue, they said, "Oh, y'all just go in the house. We'll send them later." President Nixon unleashed what was referred to as linebacker 2. Why did he release it? Because he knew there were prisoners, French prisoners, being held in North Vietnam that had been there since 1954. To follow up on that, they were not released until 1979. And if you wouldn't have allowed it, America wouldn't have allowed it. And I definitely, the men and women in uniform said, "We want to do something to bring our brothers home. And linebacker 2, in a period of 11 days, we brought more bombs than has ever been dropped in the history of mankind. And to follow up what John said, we didn't go in there and bring them back. We just dropped them. And then you might say that I saw 11 days of daylight as the B-52s bombed all night long, and the little guys kept them busy all day. And they finally came back to the peace table. And an honorary peace was signed on the 26th of January, 1973. You might say on the 12th of February, we were homeward bound. I was one of the first ones released because of being an early shoot down. I can remember my officer friends saying, well, we want to bring out the sick, wounded, and the enlisted first. I said, hell, we've been here first. We get to go on the first airplane anyway. Quit trying to make yourself look good. But we were homeward bound. You know, someone asked a friend of mine, said, could you identify the word freedom? And he responded, doors with inside knobs. You see, I came home to a hero's welcome that belonged to you. I was well aware that you were ushered in into the darkness of night. You were not allowed to wear your uniform, and if possible, you were allowed to let your hair grow so you could blend in. It's not to offend anyone. I came home to bands. At first, it was just at military installations and families and local dignitaries. And then it was at Scott Air Force Base. It was finally opened up to the public. I was told by the Vietnamese nobody cared, that you're just indifferent, you're insignificant. But when I looked out and saw 5,000 people at 2 o'clock in the morning standing in a snowstorm just to hold an American flag and say, welcome home, I was back to the America that I remembered. You know, as I look back on my 72 years here on earth, and I have not seen anything that will change it at that point, but I'll always say one of the saddest moments to me in American history during my time is when we forgave those who ran before we as America stood up and said thank you to those who served. We were just young men and women that our nation called upon, and we answered their call. One of the things that gets left out of history, yes, we sent a few cowards to Canada, but they sent 3 times as many back to stand shoulder to shoulder with us. So I say thank you again to my Canadian brothers who stood with us in Vietnam. As I mentioned, over 7 million wore the uniform. Now they're saying nearly 2/3 of those who actually served in Vietnam have died from this thing called age, and many more have died from this thing called Agent Orange. And hopefully someday America will eventually deal with it truthfully and upfront so that we can avoid any of this being passed down to our children and our grandchildren. Like I said, we had so many vets. It's unbelievable. You know, and I was up in Johnson City just a week ago, and somebody gave me a name. He says, "Do you know this fellow?" I said, "Don't have a clue." He said he was an enlisted airman captured in North Vietnam in 1969. I said, "I don't know where the hell he was, but he sure wasn't with my bunch." So another one gets rooted out. But in true terms of losses, we did have over 300,000 sustaining injuries of both mental and physical nature. As I mentioned, over 58,000 names on the wall. You know, when you think about time, it took them 4.5 months to engrave that granite wall just to honor those who made the supreme sacrifice. And we think about the 20,000 kids who grew up without a father. I was at a wall one point. I was a guest speaker, and I went by to pay my respects to my co-pilot and a couple of my friends that died in captivity. I noticed a young man, I wouldn't say he was young, but he was sitting there with his hand on a name. I said, "Someone you know?" He said, "My father." He said, "I wasn't born when he died." And he said, "That's my wife down at the far end. And we come here every time, and she puts her name on her brother's, puts her hand on her brother's name, and I put my hand on my father's name so we can connect them as we honor them." Me personally, only 1 out of 5 aircrew members shot down over Southeast Asia survived. So I can truly say I'm one of the luckiest men alive. Yes, Walter Cronkite is the one that, when he had talked about the Tet Offensive of 1968, when we killed, wounded, and captured nearly 45,000 North Vietnamese soldiers, we lost 100 brave men, and he referred to that as a defeat for America. Yes, we won every battle except the one, the battle of the press. For it was LBJ said, "If I lost the press, I've lost the world." But what makes me so proud to be here with you today is the fact you didn't give up. You stood ready. A gentleman walked up to me earlier today, and he gave me a coin that's very proudly the Vietnam symbol on the front side, and then on the back side it says, "Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another." That's one coin that won't go in my coin collection. It will be carried in my pocket. But if we have one responsibility, that is never to abandon our brothers. And I might say we have done one hell of a job. Because in 1990, after the Gulf War, the Fondas, the Kennedys, and the Carries took to the airways, again, criticizing the men and women in uniform. It was a Vietnam veteran that stood up and said, "Hell no, not again." And as a result of your action, this country has made a change. You see, my generation was unable to separate the war from the warrior. But now, as a result of the action of many of you here in this room today, we have been able to create the war and the warrior as two different things. These young men and women are out there representing us, and you will not allow the government to criticize them. You can criticize the war all you want, but these are honorable young men and women. They're our sons, they're our daughters, they're our nieces, our nephews, and in many ways, our grandnieces, nephews, grandchildren. have took up the cause we took up. And so we should give ourselves a pat on the back for the job well done in making sure that our present-day military get their rightful place in history. In closing, I want to share with you the words of a friend of mine who's long since passed, but he talked about his captivity. He said, during over 5 years in captivity, one idea has dominated my thinking. How fortunate I am to be an American. I have seen the other side. I have had every real and imaginative fault of the United States of America pointed out to me time and time again by my captors. But I have returned with a strong conviction, although we are far from perfect, our system, our basic ideas exceed all others on earth, and that our principles are honorable and just. When I read his last paragraph, I think he was looking into the future as he said, I have faith that we will continue to work for a peaceful world and freedom while firmly resisting those who would enslave mankind. I think Ronald Reagan said it the most clearest of anyone when he said, some people spend an entire lifetime wondering if they made a difference. Our armed forces doesn't have that problem. Some people dream the dream. Some people live the dream. Some defend the dream. God bless the defenders of the dream. Thank you.
I got to do a little thing. Hang on. I'd like to present Bill with our Achievement Medal. I think he deserves more, but we'll work on that one. Bill? Thank you. We were talking, some of us earlier, you know, hero gets kicked around a lot. And, you know, I mean, any athlete, certain athletes, all kinds of people, they throw the word hero around. Some people didn't like the word hero recently. This is a hero. Thank you. Thank you.